I learned that night that the loudest people in a room are usually the ones most afraid of being proven wrong. The first time I walked into Vincent Romano's private boardroom, nobody saw me as a person. They saw a uniform. They saw tired hands from carrying plates all evening. They saw a waitress who smelled faintly like coffee and fresh mint from the restaurant downstairs. And before I even spoke a single word, they had already decided I did not belong. I still remember the elevator ride to the top floor of Romano Tower. 47 floors above the city, surrounded by glass, steel, and people who measured success by the size of their bank accounts. My reflection stared back at me from the elevator wall. Brown hair tied into a neat bun. Simple white blouse. Black work shoes that had already survived a 12-hour shift. Nothing about me looked like someone who belonged beside Vincent Romano. Vincent stood next to me in complete silence. That was the thing about him. He never needed to announce his power. He carried it quietly. His black tailored suit looked untouched even after the longest day. His slicked-back black hair was perfect. The dark ink tattoos on his hands and neck told stories nobody dared to ask about. Most people looked at Vincent and saw control, influence, authority. But after spending enough time around him, I started noticing something else. The heavier the room around him became, the quieter he got. "You know what they're going to do when those doors open," he said. His voice was calm, but I knew there was a question hidden inside it. I looked at the glowing numbers above the elevator doors. "Yes. And you still want to walk in?" I turned toward him. "Want to?" "No." I smiled slightly. "Need to?" "Yes." For a moment, Vincent studied me like he was trying to understand why someone without power was not afraid of powerful people. The truth was simple. I had spent my whole life being underestimated. After a while, you stop fearing people who look down on you. You start paying attention to what they fail to see. 3 nights earlier, while serving dinner at the private restaurant below Romano Tower, I heard Vincent's board celebrating a new financial move. They talked about expansion, acquisitions, growth. Numbers that sounded impressive enough to make everyone at the table proud. Everyone except me. I was clearing empty glasses when something caught my attention. The numbers worked only if everything went perfectly. And life had taught me one thing wealthy people sometimes forgot. Nothing goes perfectly forever. I spent 2 nights reviewing what little public information I could find. Reports. Market patterns. Similar business failures. I was not trying to prove anyone wrong. I was trying to understand why something felt off. And the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. Vincent's empire was not being strengthened. It was being stretched thin. The elevator stopped. Vincent did not move immediately. "Emma," he said quietly. "Once you step inside, they won't care that you're right unless you can prove it." I looked at him. "I know. They'll test you. I know. They'll judge you before they hear you." I looked at the doors in front of us. "They already have." Something changed in his expression then. Not surprise. Not pity. Respect. The doors opened into a hallway so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. At the end waited the boardroom where some of the most influential people in Vincent's world made decisions. I walked toward it knowing exactly what they would see first. The waitress. The outsider. The girl who should have stayed downstairs. They had no idea the person they were about to dismiss was the only one who noticed the mistake sitting right in front of them. The boardroom doors opened before I had time to wonder if I was ready. Maybe that was a good thing. Sometimes courage disappears when you give yourself too much time to think. The first thing I noticed was not the expensive furniture or the city lights shining through the glass walls. It was the silence. 12 people sat around a long black marble table, and every conversation stopped the moment they saw Vincent. That was the kind of presence he had. A room could be full of powerful voices, but when Vincent Romano entered, everyone remembered who they were speaking to. Then their eyes moved from him to me. And the silence changed. Respect became confusion. Confusion became judgment. I had experienced that look hundreds of times before while working at the restaurant. The quick glance people gave when they decided they already knew your story. One man leaned back in his chair, looking more entertained than surprised. I recognized him immediately. Richard Vale. Vincent's senior financial advisor. He was always polite when Vincent was around, but I had seen how he treated people he believed could do nothing for him. Vincent, Richard said with a small smile. I was not aware we requested service tonight. A few people around the table looked down, trying to hide their reactions. I felt the insult exactly as he intended it. Quiet. Professional. Wrapped in expensive manners. Vincent's expression did not change. Emma is not here to serve. That answer made the room even more uncomfortable. Richard looked at me again. This time longer. Then I apologize. I must have misunderstood. He paused. What exactly is her role in a financial strategy meeting? There it was. The real question everyone wanted to ask. Why was someone like me standing in a place built for people like them? I waited for Vincent to answer. A part of me expected him to. After all, this was his world. His building. His board. But he did something nobody expected. He pulled out a chair and looked at me. That is Emma's question to answer. For a second, I forgot about everyone else. Because Vincent could have protected me with his authority. He could have demanded they respect me. Instead, he gave me something far more important. The chance to earn my own place. I sat down. Richard folded his hands. All right, Emma. Tell us. The way he said my name sounded like a challenge. I believe there is a problem with the West Harbor expansion plan. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Some people looked irritated. Others looked amused. Richard smiled like he had been waiting for me to make a mistake. And you discovered this problem while bringing coffee? I looked at him calmly. No. I noticed the first warning sign while bringing coffee. His smile faded slightly. There is a difference. Nobody spoke. I continued. You are treating growth as proof of strength. But expansion without stability is not strength. It is exposure. An older board member stopped writing and looked up. Richard noticed. Interesting statement, he said. But businesses are not built on feelings. I agree, I answered. They are built on decisions. And bad decisions become expensive when nobody in the room wants to question them. The silence that followed felt heavier than the laughter before it. I could feel Vincent watching from the end of the table. He was not stepping in. He was not saving me. For once, the most powerful man in the room was simply listening. Richard opened a folder and slid several pages toward me. Then let us see what you actually understand. Everyone watched as the papers stopped in front of me. They expected hesitation. They expected fear. They expected the waitress they imagined. I picked up the first page and started reading. And within seconds, I saw exactly what they had missed. I did not rush through the documents. That was another thing people often misunderstood about confidence. They thought confidence meant answering the fastest or speaking the loudest. But sometimes real confidence was being comfortable enough to slow down when everyone expected you to panic. I turned each page carefully while the board watched me. The numbers were familiar, but seeing them arranged together confirmed what I already suspected. The problem was not hidden because it was complicated. It was hidden because everyone looking at it wanted the same answer. They wanted the expansion to work. They wanted the projections to be right. So they stopped searching for reasons they might be wrong. Richard tapped his finger against the table. Take your time, he said. These reports usually require years of financial experience to fully understand. The message behind his words was obvious. He was reminding everyone what I lacked. The degrees. The titles. The expensive offices. I looked up. How many locations are included in the first expansion phase? Richard seemed surprised by the question. 32. And how many reached independent profitability before you approved the second phase? The room became quiet. A woman sitting across from me checked her own documents. Richard adjusted his posture. That is not the primary measurement for this strategy. I know, I said. That is why there is a problem. Someone at the table leaned forward. For the first time since I entered, curiosity started replacing judgment. I turned one of the pages around. You are measuring how quickly you can acquire assets. But you are not measuring how much pressure those assets create after you own them. I pointed to the report. Maintenance. Staffing. Market changes. Delayed returns. Small costs that look harmless separately but become dangerous together. The older board member who noticed me earlier picked up the page. She is talking about operational drag. Those 5 words changed the energy in the room. Because they did not come from me. They came from one of them. Richard noticed it too. We accounted for operational costs. I nodded. You accounted for predictable operational costs. I moved to another number. But your model assumes customer behavior stays consistent. It assumes market conditions remain favorable. It assumes every location performs on schedule. I looked around the table. When a strategy only survives under perfect conditions, it is not a strategy. It is a hope. Nobody laughed that time. I could feel the shift happening slowly. Not acceptance. Not yet. But attention. Vincent remained silent at the far end of the table. His tattooed hands rested calmly in front of him, but his eyes caught every reaction. He knew this room better than anyone. He knew the exact moment people stopped pretending. Richard closed his folder. You speak well, Emma. But pointing out risk is easy. Anyone can say something might fail. He leaned forward. The difficult part is creating something better. That was the challenge he wanted. He was not trying to understand my point anymore. He was trying to return me to the place he believed I belonged. Someone who could observe but not lead. Someone who could notice problems but not solve them. I took a quiet breath. You are right. Richard looked satisfied for half a second. Then I continued. Finding mistakes is not enough. That is why I prepared an alternative. The expression around the table changed. I reached into my folder and pulled out the notes I had spent the last 2 nights creating after my restaurant shifts. Pages written at 2 in the morning in my small apartment while the rest of the city slept. I placed them on the table. You built a plan around expansion. I looked at the board. I built one around survival. And for the first time that night, every person in the room wanted to hear what the waitress had to say next. I watched their eyes move toward the pages in front of me. It was strange how quickly a room could change without anyone admitting it. A few minutes earlier, those same people wondered why I was allowed to sit at the table. Now they were wondering what was written on the papers I brought. Respect did not arrive all at once. Sometimes it entered quietly through the small cracks left behind by curiosity. I stood and walked toward the glass board near the wall. Your current strategy depends on speed, I said. My strategy depends on control. Richard crossed his arms. Control is exactly what expansion creates. I picked up the marker. Not always. I wrote 3 numbers on the glass. Owning more does not automatically mean controlling more. I turned back toward them. Sometimes the more you own, the more owns you. Nobody interrupted. That was when I knew the conversation had changed. They were no longer waiting for me to fail. They were listening for what came next. I explained how slowing the acquisition schedule could protect the company from unnecessary exposure. I showed them where resources were being divided too quickly. I showed them how smaller adjustments could protect thousands of employees and strengthen the foundation Vincent had already built. But the part that surprised them most was not the financial theory. It was where I learned to see the pattern. A restaurant teaches you more about business than people realize, I said. Richard almost smiled. A restaurant? Yes. I looked at him. Because every single night, I watched decisions become consequences. The room stayed quiet. If the kitchen orders too much inventory, money disappears. If managers schedule poorly, the team struggles. If prices rise too quickly, customers change their habits. Small mistakes become big problems when people ignore them. I pointed toward their reports. Your numbers are larger. The principle is the same. For the first time, Richard had no immediate response. Another board member, Catherine, looked through my notes carefully. How long did this take you? 2 nights. She looked up. You rebuilt a risk model in 2 nights? No, I answered honestly. I rebuilt the part everyone stopped questioning. That answer created another silence. A different kind. The kind that happens when people are forced to reconsider something they were certain about. Then Vincent finally spoke. Why did you notice it? Everyone looked at him. Even me. It was the first question he had asked since we entered. Not because he doubted me. Because he wanted them to hear the answer. I thought about it for a moment. Because I know what it feels like when one mistake costs everything. The room softened, but I did not say it for sympathy. Some people can afford to ignore small losses. Some cannot. When you grow up measuring every dollar, you learn to see where things leak. Vincent looked at me differently after that. I could not fully understand his expression, but I knew something shifted. He spent years surrounded by people who protected wealth. I spent years understanding the fear of losing what little you had. 2 completely different worlds. Somehow looking at the same problem. Richard noticed the change too, and I could see that bothered him more than my calculations. Because this was no longer about a report. It was about whether someone like me could belong in a room like this. He opened another file slowly. Before everyone gets impressed too quickly, he said, there is one more thing we should discuss. The tension returned immediately. His voice was calm, but the atmosphere changed. Vincent looked at the folder in Richard's hand. For the first time that night, I saw concern appear behind his controlled expression. And I realized the hardest test was not the numbers I had already solved. It was the one they had been waiting to reveal. The folder in Richard's hand felt heavier than all the numbers I had already faced. Not because I knew what was inside, but because I understood his expression. He was no longer trying to test the strategy. He was trying to test me. There was a difference. A person searching for the truth asks questions because they want answers. A person protecting their pride asks questions because they want someone else to fail. Richard placed the folder in the center of the table and slowly opened it. Since Emma has such a strong understanding of our future, he said, perhaps she should understand our concerns about the person giving us advice. The way he said person told me exactly where this was going. The numbers were no longer enough. Now the conversation was about status. Catherine looked uncomfortable. Richard, her proposal deserves review on its own. Does it? He asked. Everyone here spent decades building experience. We have analysts, consultants, executives. Are we really going to ignore all of that because someone walked in with a few interesting observations? I felt every eye return to me. Only this time, the pressure was different. Before, they doubted whether I understood business. Now they questioned whether I deserved to understand it. Vincent leaned forward slightly. The entire room noticed. For most people, that small movement from him would have been enough to end the conversation. But before he could speak, I looked at him and shook my head gently. I knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to protect me. A part of me wanted to let him. But if Vincent forced them to respect me, they would only respect his power, not my voice. It is okay, I said. Vincent looked at me for a long second. Emma. Please. That single word created the first real distance between us that night. I saw it in his eyes. He was not angry. He was struggling. Vincent built his entire life around preventing people he cared about from standing alone against a room full of judgment. But I had spent my entire life learning how to stand when nobody was standing beside me. Richard noticed the exchange. Interesting, he said. Even Vincent seems unsure. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I believed it. Because for a moment, I wondered if part of it was true. Did Vincent bring me here because he trusted me completely, or because he was still waiting to see if I belonged? I looked at him, and the silence between us answered nothing. So I turned back to Richard. You want to know why you should listen to a waitress? He did not deny it. Yes, Emma. I do. I nodded. Because a title tells you what someone is paid to do. It does not tell you what they are capable of seeing. I picked up the report again. And right now, what I see is something nobody has mentioned. Catherine looked up. What do you mean? I flipped to the final projection page. These numbers are not only too optimistic. I pointed to a pattern repeated across multiple reports. They are inconsistent. The atmosphere changed immediately. Vincent's expression sharpened. Richard became completely still. Explain, Vincent said. His voice was calm, but this time there was something underneath it. Concern. I looked closer at the figures. The feeling I had ignored before became impossible to dismiss. The earlier reports and the final proposal do not match. Someone adjusted the risk expectations. Nobody moved. The argument about me suddenly became much smaller than the truth sitting in front of us. I looked around the table. This was never about whether I belonged in this room. I placed the paper down. The real question is why everyone who belonged here missed this. The silence after my question felt different from every silence before it. Earlier that night, people were quiet because they doubted me. Now they were quiet because they were doubting something much bigger. The room they trusted. The system they trusted. Maybe even themselves. Vincent reached for the report, and I watched his eyes move across the numbers. He did not react quickly. That was one thing I had learned about him. People expected powerful men to respond with emotion, but Vincent responded with observation. He studied everything first. The mistake. The timing. The people around him. Who approved the final adjustment, he asked. Nobody answered immediately. That hesitation told me more than any explanation could. Catherine checked her own documents. The revision was added after our first review. Another board member frowned. That should have required another evaluation. Richard adjusted his jacket. It was a minor update based on projected growth. I looked back at the numbers. No, it was not. Everyone turned toward me again. This time, I felt the weight of it. Before, challenging their strategy was uncomfortable. This was different. This meant suggesting someone they trusted had ignored something important. Emma, Vincent said quietly. I looked at him. For the first time that night, I could not read his expression. Are you certain? The question was fair. But it still hurt. After everything I had shown, after every number I had explained, One small part of me wondered if he still needed proof because the doubt in that room had finally reached him too. I looked away for a second. Not because I was angry. Because I needed to remember why I was there. Not to impress Vincent. Not to defeat Richard. To tell the truth. Yes, I answered. I am certain. Vincent heard the change in my voice. I knew he did. But the distance between us had already appeared. He wanted absolute certainty before questioning someone he had trusted for years. I understood that. I just wished understanding it made it hurt less. Richard leaned back. This is exactly the danger of bringing emotion into business. Suddenly assumptions become accusations. I closed the folder. You are right about one thing. He looked surprised. Business should not be controlled by emotion. I slid the documents forward. That includes pride. Catherine looked between the reports again. Emma is correct about the difference. The risk percentage was reduced in the final version. The room shifted. Richard was no longer looking at me like I was an outsider. He was looking at me like I was a problem. Numbers can be interpreted many ways, he said. I nodded. Yes. But patterns cannot. I walked back to the glass board and circled the 3 areas that bothered me most. 3 departments. 3 projections. 3 changes, all creating the same result. Vincent stood slowly. The room immediately noticed. And what result is that? He asked. I looked at the financial plan that everyone had been ready to approve before I walked in. It makes the expansion look safer than it really is. Nobody spoke. If you move forward based on these numbers, you commit resources before seeing the real risk. I looked at Vincent. You do not lose because the business fails. I paused. You lose because you trusted information designed to make you stop asking questions. That sentence stayed in the air between us. Not just because of the company. Because we both knew it meant something else too. Trust was the real issue. Vincent had spent his life trusting almost nobody. Tonight, the one person asking him to question his own world was the person who came from completely outside of it. And I could see the conflict in his eyes. Choosing to believe me meant accepting that someone close to him might have failed him. Choosing not to meant accepting that maybe he had underestimated me too. For several seconds, Vincent did not say anything. The entire room waited for him because that was what they were used to doing. They expected Vincent Romano to decide the truth. They expected his approval, his judgment, his final word. But that night, he did something nobody expected. He looked away from the board and looked at me. Show me, he said. 2 simple words. Not a command. Not a rescue. A choice. He was giving me the space to prove what I had already seen. Richard's expression changed because he understood what that meant. Vincent was not choosing my side. He was choosing the evidence. And somehow, that mattered even more. I opened the reports again and connected every adjustment one by one. The room followed quietly as the pattern became impossible to ignore. The changes were small enough to appear harmless alone, but together they created a version of the future that looked safer than reality. This is what happens when everyone wants good news, I said. People stop questioning the story they want to believe. Catherine reviewed the timeline carefully. These changes happened after the outside consultation. A board member checked another file. The recommendations were added during the final review period. The conversation around the table shifted. For the first time, they were not discussing whether I belonged there. They were discussing the problem I found. But I could not enjoy being right. Because the look on Vincent's face reminded me that every answer had a cost. This was not just about saving a business decision. It was about realizing trust had been placed in the wrong direction. Vincent walked toward the window overlooking the city. The lights reflected against the glass, and for a moment the man everyone feared looked like someone carrying a weight nobody else could see. I followed him after a moment. Vincent. He did not turn immediately. I built everything by reading people, he said quietly. By noticing what others ignored. His reflection looked back at me. And tonight you noticed something happening right in front of me. I understood then. He was not disappointed in me. He was disappointed in himself. You cannot see everything alone, I said. That is not weakness. He turned. In my world, people wait for weakness. Maybe that is the problem. The words came out softer than I expected. Maybe everyone around you learned to prove they were useful instead of telling you when something was wrong. For the first time, I wondered if I had gone too far. The room was silent behind us. Everyone heard it. But Vincent did not look offended. He looked like someone hearing a truth he avoided for a long time. Richard interrupted the moment. This is becoming a personal conversation instead of a financial one. I turned back toward him. No. It has always been both. I picked up the original proposal. Numbers are created by people. Decisions are made by people. Mistakes happen because of people. I looked around the table. You spent all night asking why a waitress could understand business. I paused. Maybe the better question is why you believed business could be understood without understanding people. Nobody answered. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the question reached a place numbers could not protect. The same people who looked past me when I entered were now waiting for my next words. Richard looked down at the documents in front of him. The confidence he carried all night was slowly disappearing. I did not feel victory watching that happen. I only felt the strange sadness of realizing how many people confuse being important with being right. Vincent returned to his seat, but something about him had changed. He was no longer watching to see if I could survive his world. He was watching his world learn how to make room for me. The most powerful moment in that room did not happen when people realized the numbers were wrong. It happened when they realized the way they looked at people might have been wrong too. For the first time all night, nobody was trying to prove they were the smartest person at the table. They were reviewing. Listening. Questioning. The same actions they should have been doing from the beginning. Catherine compared the original plan with my proposal and slowly nodded. If we delay the second phase and strengthen the existing locations first, the company keeps flexibility. Another board member added, and avoids unnecessary pressure if the market changes. I stayed quiet for a moment. Not because I had nothing left to say. Because I wanted to see what happened when the idea no longer needed my defense. A good strategy should survive even when the person who created it stops talking. Richard sat across the room, staring at the documents. I expected another argument. Another attempt to remind everyone who I was and who I was not. Instead, his voice came out quieter. I still do not understand. I looked at him. Understand what? How you saw it. There was no insult this time. Only confusion. And somehow, that felt more honest. Because we all looked at the same information. I thought about every late night I spent balancing my own bills. Every difficult choice between what I wanted and what I actually needed. Every shift where I watched managers solve problems that never appeared on reports. Maybe because I was not looking for the biggest number, I said. I was looking for the smallest weakness. Richard looked away. For the first time, I saw a person instead of an opponent. Someone who spent years proving his value and forgot other people were trying to do the same. Vincent finally stood and walked back toward the table. Everyone became still out of habit. But this time, he did not use that silence to control the room. He used it to change it. I want Emma's adjustments included in the review. Nobody objected. And from now on, I want concerns brought forward before they become problems. His eyes moved around the table. I do not need people who tell me every decision is perfect. He paused. I need people willing to tell me when it is not. That sentence carried more weight than any order could. Because everyone understood Vincent was not only speaking to them. He was speaking about himself too. The man who built everything by trusting his own judgment was admitting that even strength needed another perspective. When the meeting finally ended, people gathered their papers differently than when they arrived. They no longer moved around me like I was invisible. Catherine stopped beside me near the door. Emma. I turned. She smiled slightly. For what it is worth, I am glad you were in this room tonight. A few hours earlier, those words would have meant everything to me. But strangely, I realized I did not need them as much anymore. Because my value had never depended on whether they recognized it. I only forgot that sometimes. When everyone left, only Vincent and I remained. The city stretched endlessly outside the windows. He looked at the empty chairs around the table. I owe you an apology. I looked at him. For what? For thinking protecting you meant stepping in. His voice softened. I almost forgot that sometimes respect means stepping back. I looked at the man everyone believed was impossible to challenge and saw someone brave enough to question himself. You trusted me when it mattered, I said. Vincent looked at me. Not soon enough. And in his honesty, I heard something more meaningful than perfection. I heard change. The room looked completely different after everyone walked out, even though nothing inside it had actually changed. The same glass walls surrounded us. The same long table stretched across the center. The same city lights covered the skyline outside. But I learned that night that places are not defined by their walls. They are defined by how people make you feel when you stand inside them. When I first entered, that room felt like a place built to remind me of everything I was not. Not wealthy enough. Not experienced enough. Not important enough. Now I stood there realizing those were never facts. They were only opinions spoken loudly by people who never stopped to question them. Vincent picked up one of my handwritten pages from the table. Compared to the polished reports around it, my notes looked simple. A few coffee marks on the corner. Lines rewritten several times. Calculations squeezed into empty spaces because I had worked with what I had. He looked at the page for a long moment. Do you know what surprised them the most tonight? He asked. I smiled slightly. That I knew what I was talking about? No, he shook his head. That you never needed them to believe you before you believed yourself. I looked away toward the city. The truth was more complicated than that. I was afraid, Vincent. He watched me quietly. I heard every word they said. I felt every look. A part of me wondered if maybe they were right. Admitting that was harder than defending a financial strategy in front of the entire board. Then why did you keep going? He asked. I thought about it. Because being afraid of their judgment would have hurt less than staying silent and proving them right. Vincent looked down at his tattooed hands resting against the table. The same hands people associated with control and authority. But that night, I saw something different. I saw a man learning that strength was not always about holding tighter. Sometimes it was about trusting someone enough to let go. My whole life, he said quietly, people respected the position before they understood the person. He looked at me. You walked in with no position, and you made them understand the person first. Those words stayed with me. Not because they came from Vincent Romano, but because they came from someone who finally understood what I had been fighting for. I never wanted to become someone else to belong in his world. I wanted his world to understand that value could arrive wearing a different uniform. The next morning, I returned to the restaurant. Same apron. Same tables. Same coffee orders. Some people expected everything to change after that night. They expected me to leave that part of my life behind as if respect meant escaping where I came from. But I never saw it that way. My work was never something that made me smaller. The people who judged it were. A few days later, Catherine told me the board approved the revised strategy. More reviews were added. More questions were welcomed. The company did not become perfect overnight because people never do. But something had shifted. The room that once protected pride started protecting honesty. And Vincent changed too. Not into a different man. He was still controlled. Still powerful. Still carried the weight of every decision he made. But he listened differently. He trusted differently. He understood that the strongest voice in the room was not always the one that spoke first. Sometimes it was the one everyone ignored until they could not anymore. Years later, people still asked me about that night. They wanted to know how I changed their minds. The truth was, I did not change them. I only showed them what they had overlooked. Because power can open doors. Money can build rooms. Fear can create silence. But none of those things can replace the quiet strength of someone who knows their worth before anyone else sees it.